All again for being here for the second day of this seminar of the midterm of the T20 Brazil. Well, this opening remarks here will be previous to the panel that will discuss fighting hunger, poverty and inequality. In this sense, I will talk more about inequalities in my opening remarks, and then I think the others will follow, and we'll have a speech from Esther Flo and also from Flora Miamba. And why inequalities? First of all, we have to see what we have here at the task force of T20. You see inequalities in all task forces. The first one, and clear one, is task force 1, when you say fighting hunger, poverty, and inequalities. Inequalities in what? Access to health services, access to education, thinking about care economy and its burden for women, thinking about tax burden for all, and also thinking about how we're going to finance all this process of reducing inequalities. We also have this in Task Force 2. We have this when they say the term inequality refers to equitable access to finance and technological transfer, but also an inclusive, just energy transition. We have in the reforming of financial architecture services, financial architecture, we have financial system rules and regulations and global finance safety nets to promote stability, sustainability, and equity. That is also makes reference to ensuring a fairer global tax architecture. Trade investment and inclusive growth refers to trade and investment to fight inequity, poverty, hunger, and social inclusion, and also makes a reference to women in trade. Inclusive digital transformation. Digital inclusion and minimal connectivity are one of the topics. And Task Force 6, about strengthening multilateralism and global governance, is not referring to inequality in itself, but for sure has to have something to do with it. So, yesterday we saw the terms social justice, fairness, and inclusion being repeated in all panels, all the time. So T20 has to deal with inequality. G20 has to deal with inequalities. What kind of inequality? Inequality in income, inequality in the labor market, inequality in educational attainment, inequality in access to health services, inequality in access to housing, inequality in access to social security benefits, inequality in access to credit, inequality in representation, political and leadership representation, inequality in access to land as a means of production and of living, and also inequality in wealth. There is a recent working paper from the Inter-American Bank here, Development Bank, that brings from Caraza, De Rosa, and Flores, and published last year, that they said that the wealth to income ratio more than double in Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and Uruguay, but they also argue there is upward trend in the world. So that's what we're talking about. We are talking about all these inequalities, but also inequality in wealth. And we have just get out one of the most difficult phases of the world in the pandemic of COVID. It was clear for all of us that access to means of production cannot be concentrated in some countries and cannot be concentrated in some specific place of that countries. We have to make equal access to the means of production to respond to next pandemic and also to respond to all the crises that we are leading with. We have to deal with the fact that the richest appropriate almost of the 50% of the world income. How disrupting can be the process where huge parts of the world population have no access or limited access to basic services. The burden of care is much bigger for women and for some racial and ethnic groups. Is decent work for all? For sure not. We are seeing a world of platformization when the quality of work is not accessible to everybody. We are treating the equal equally. We are treating the unequal unequally. Or we are treating equally the unequal. We're doing this. We are treating equally the unequal. We have women being almost 50% of the world population, and here in Brazil, it's more than 50, it's almost 52% of the population. But although there is an increase in educational attainment for women here in Brazil, for example, has better levels of average education and also quality of education. This is not being converted in access to better salaries and better wage and better income for women in the world. So we have also to deal with this. We are looking at our futures. Despite this progress, you also see a huge gap between black and whites. We don't have these figures for the world, but we know that in the world, less than 20% of the world population can be considered white. So how we have so much discrimination, ethical and racial discrimination in the world, and here in Brazil. We have the black man receiving less than half of the wages of white men, and black women even less. So if you look at these figures, we have to say that we are making proposals. We are making proposals for fighting inequality, for inclusive just energy transition, inclusive growth, inclusive digital transformation, reforming the financial architecture, strengthening multilateralism, and reforming global governance. Are we considering the equal equality or unequal inequality process? Are we really embedding in considering the criteria of equity and justice in our proposals? Are we bringing gender, race, and territory as part of our proposals? That's something that is meaningful. We are doing meaningful proposals. If you are doing meaningful proposals for T20 and G20, we cannot not consider racial and ethical aspects of inequality. We cannot not consider the aspects of territory. We cannot not consider the aspects of gender. So we have to go beyond what we have done in the last 6 months and consider all the aspects of inequalities and have proposal to it. I call you all for thinking about what are the instruments for tax reform in a just way in reducing inequality in all these aspects. What are the reforms instruments of the financial architecture that will consider all these aspects? Access to credits are necessary to be more inclusive in all these aspects. How digital transformation consider the aspects of racial, territory, and black population and women in this process. So let's work on it. Let's have these next 3 months for work in implementing the recommendations, but bringing inequalities for the center and as a cross-cutting issue in all our proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Ms. Luciana Servo.